There is a door every major religion warned you not to open alone at night. Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, Tibetan, Greek, Egyptian, Norse. They did not coordinate. They did not share texts. They could not have agreed in advance. And yet every single one of them warned about the same threshold, with the same hour written across it, and the same instruction beside it. Do not enter alone after dark. If you must enter, enter with a structure beside you. The checkpoint will tell you what they were warning about, what each tradition saw on the other side, and why almost every modern adult opens this door alone every single night without a single one of the protective practices the tradition spent 2,000 years perfecting. The door is not metaphorical. The door is a real cognitive threshold. The body crosses every night past about 11. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which door you have been opening, what comes through it when you do, and the one closing rite drawn from every tradition that makes the door survivable. Before the first tradition is named, one thing has to be said clearly. Comparative religion has a phrase for the pattern. The checkpoint is about to inspect independent convergence when two or more traditions with no shared origin and no contact arrive at the same warning. The warning is almost always pointing at something real about the human nervous system. The reason is structural. Religions evolve over centuries around recurring problems in the lives of their members. If a problem is universal, every tradition has to invent a vocabulary for it. Different vocabulary, same problem. The checkpoint will tell you upfront what the problem was. Every tradition observed that the human mind, alone, at night, without a companion or a structure, becomes vulnerable to a particular set of contents that the daytime mind is built to filter out. Each tradition named those contents differently. The Christians called them demons. The Sufis called them companions. The Tibetans called them bardo entities. The Hebrews called them Lilith and her daughters. The Hindus called them asuric forces. The Buddhists called them makyo. The Greeks called them dreams from the gate of ivory. The Egyptians called them the gates of the Duat. The Norse called them the dead at the door. The checkpoint will tell you what they were all describing in modern language. They were describing the moment after dark, when the mind's daytime defenses go off duty and the unfiltered contents of the unconscious, every unprocessed feeling, every postponed decision, every unspoken regret, every comparison the day did not have time for, start arriving at the threshold of the conscious self with no doorman. That moment, every tradition agreed, is real. It happens almost every night. It always has. And every tradition agreed that the worst possible thing a human being could do in that moment was open the door alone. Listen carefully. Tradition 1, the Christian desert tradition. In the 4th century, in the deserts of Egypt and Palestine, the early Christian monastics, Evagrius Ponticus, John Cassian, the Desert Fathers, built one of the most detailed maps of nighttime spiritual danger. in the entire history of religion. They named 8 thoughts, logismoi, that arrived at the door of the solitary mind. The most dangerous, by their own account, was Asidia, the noonday demon, which they specifically warned arrived in the hour of solitude, when the structures of community and rule were furthest away. Asidia was not laziness. Asidia was the slow conviction, arriving in unguarded solitude, that nothing the monk had built, nothing the monk had renounced, nothing the monk had become was worth anything. The checkpoint will tell you what the desert fathers were watching. They were watching what happens when an isolated mind, without external structure, is left alone for too long, with the unfiltered evaluation of its own life. The cargo. A verdict produced by an unsupervised internal court, which the next morning's daylight would have argued against, but which, in the night hour, has no opposing counsel. The Christian remedy was specific. Never enter the cell alone after dark without the liturgy of the hours on the lips. Never sleep without a closing prayer. Never let the door open onto silence that has no companion. The checkpoint counts this as warning 1. The door is the door of unsupervised internal trial. Tradition 2. The Sufi Islamic tradition. In Islamic theology, every human being is born with a qarin, an inner companion, a constant interior voice, traditionally understood as a kind of spiritual presence that whispers across the threshold of the heart. The Sufi masters, Al-Ghazali, Rumi, Ibn Arabi, observed that the qarin's voice is faintest in daylight, when the world's noise overwrites it, and loudest at night in the hour after the Isha prayer, when the body is alone with itself. The Sufi warning is precise. The qarin in the night hour will whisper exactly the kind of thing that, if believed without examination, will derail a life. You are not loved. You will never be enough. That decision was wrong. That person no longer wants you. Tomorrow will not arrive better. The checkpoint will tell you what the Sufis were describing. They were describing the same unsupervised internal trial the desert fathers named, but they personified it as a voice, because the night hour mind hears the trial as a sentence delivered by someone who is not quite you. The cargo, a verdict spoken in the second person, which the believer cannot tell from the voice of the eternal until daylight returns. The Sufi remedy was specific. Enter the night with dhikr, the repeated remembrance on the breath of one steady name. Do not allow the qarin the silence it requires to speak unchallenged. The checkpoint counts this as warning 2. The door is the door of unchallenged inner voice. Tradition 3. The Hebrew and Kabbalistic tradition. In Jewish folklore and later in Kabbalistic mysticism, there is a figure named Lilith, described in the Babylonian Talmud, expanded in the alphabet of Ben Sira, treated with extraordinary seriousness in the Zohar. Lilith was said to arrive at the threshold of the solitary house in the deep hours of the night, especially in the hour just before dawn, and to seek out those who were sleeping alone, particularly those whose hearts carried unresolved disquiet. The checkpoint will not debate the literal demonology. The checkpoint will inspect what the tradition was actually describing. The Kabbalistic texts are remarkably specific. Lilith was understood as the personification of the unintegrated shadow, the parts of the self that the daytime ego had refused to acknowledge, returning at the threshold of sleep to demand acknowledgement. The cargo, an unconscious that has been waiting all day for a quiet enough room to surface in. The Hebrew remedy was specific: the bedside shema, the amulet placed at the door, the verse spoken aloud before sleep to mark the threshold as occupied, the presence of another person, when possible, in the room. The checkpoint counts this as warning 3. The door is the door of the unintegrated shadow, returning at the hour the conscious mind is too tired to defend it. Tradition 4. The Hindu tradition. The Hindu tradition divides the day into 8 3-hour watches, each ruled by a different quality of consciousness. 2 of the 8 are dangerous to the solitary practitioner. The first is the Brahma Muhurta, the hour before dawn, which the texts treat as sacred, but only when entered with practice. Without practice, the same hour was understood as the asuric Muhurta, the hour when the asuras, the disorderous forces of the cosmos, can take up residence in the unattended mind. The second is the late evening hour, particularly the period between midnight and 3 a.m., which the Atharva Veda and later Tantric texts treat as the threshold across which the unintegrated material of the day is most likely to surface. The checkpoint will tell you what the Hindu sages were describing. They were describing the same nighttime threshold every other tradition named. But they read it as a fight for which kind of consciousness would occupy the mind during the unguarded hours. The disciplined consciousness or the asuric one, the one ruled by craving, fear, comparison, and grievance. The cargo, an unattended mind whose contents in the unguarded hour will be selected by whatever quality has the most unprocessed material backed up behind the door. The Hindu remedy was specific. Sandhya, the threshold prayer, performed at dawn and dusk. Mantra japa before sleep. Never enter the unguarded hour without a syllable on the breath. The checkpoint counts this as warning 4. The door is the door of which consciousness will occupy you while you are not looking. Tradition 5. The Buddhist tradition. In Zen and broader Mahayana practice, there is a category of nighttime experience named makyo, literally the realm of demons, which arises specifically in the meditator who sits alone in silence after dark. The checkpoint will tell you what makyo actually is, because the translation is misleading. Makyo is not the appearance of supernatural beings. Makyo is the surfacing of the mind's own unprocessed contents, dressed in such convincing imagery that the meditator mistakes them for revelations. Visions arrive, voices arrive, convictions arrive, decisions arrive that feel like they have been delivered from a higher source. The Zen masters, Hakuin in particular, wrote at length about makyo because they had watched too many monks take the contents of an unsupervised night session as instruction and act on them in ways that disordered their lives for years afterward. The cargo, contents that feel like revelation, that are actually undigested material the daytime mind had no time to process, arriving in a form the night mind cannot tell from prophecy. The Buddhist remedy was specific. Never sit alone in silence after dark without a teacher to bring the makyo to. Never act on a nighttime vision without a daylight inspection. The checkpoint counts this as warning 5. The door is the door of mistaking unprocessed material for revelation. Tradition 6. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The Tibetan Bardo Thodal and the broader Vajrayana literature treat sleep itself as a small bardo, a transitional state that the unprepared mind enters with no protection. The checkpoint will inspect what the Tibetan teachers were warning about. They observed that the moment of falling asleep is structurally similar to the moment of dying. The conscious self loosens, the senses withdraw, the contents of the deep mind surface, and that the contents that surface in this loosened state are accepted by the body as more real than the contents of waking life. Which means that whatever the mind was rehearsing in the moments before sleep gets built into the substrate of the next day. The cargo, the architecture of the next day's emotional weather, set during the unguarded transition into sleep by whatever the mind was allowed to chew on at the threshold. The Tibetan remedy was specific. Sleep yoga, the deliberate placement in the final waking minutes of a chosen image, mantra, or intention, so that the unguarded transition is shaped by something the practitioner chose, not by whatever the day left unfinished. The checkpoint count this as warning 6. The door is the door at which tomorrow is being built. Tradition 7. The ancient Greek tradition. In the Odyssey, Penelope describes 2 gates through which dreams pass into the sleeping mind. The gate of horn delivers true dreams. The gate of ivory delivers false ones. The Greek philosophical tradition, Heraclitus, the Pythagoreans, later the Neoplatonists, treated the nighttime mind as a place where the soul left the body and walked, and where what it brought back depended on which gate it had passed through. The checkpoint will tell you what the Greeks were watching. They had observed that the contents of the night mind are mixed. Some of them are the soul's genuine reckoning with the day, and some of them are the body's residue from things consumed, conversations had, anxieties left unaddressed. The cargo, an inability in the night hour to tell the gate of horn from the gate of ivory, to tell what the soul is genuinely telling you from what is just the residue of a hard day. The Greek remedy was specific. The evening philosophical examination. Did I act well today? Did I cause harm? What is left undone? The Pythagoreans prescribed it nightly. The Stoics, Seneca in particular, wrote about it as the only reliable way to enter sleep with the inner court already adjourned. The checkpoint counts this as warning 7. The door is the door of indistinguishable gates. Tradition 8. The ancient Egyptian tradition. The Book of Gates and the Duat, funerary texts inscribed inside royal tombs in the New Kingdom, describe 12 gates the soul of the dead must pass through during the 12 hours of the night. Each gate was guarded. Each gate had the name. Each gate had a password. The Egyptians believed that the same 12 gates were crossed by every sleeping mind, every night, in compressed form. The checkpoint will tell you what the Egyptians were describing. They had observed that the night divides itself into distinct passages, that the mind at 1 a.m. is structurally different from the mind at 3 a.m., which is structurally different from the mind at 5 a.m., and that each passage has its own specific danger. The cargo, a journey through 12 different states of unguarded mind every night, with no awareness on the sleeper's part of which state they are crossing. The Egyptian remedy was specific. The amulet at the throat, the text of the gates inscribed where the body would lie, protection placed in advance because the sleeper would not be conscious enough to invoke it in the moment of need. The checkpoint counts this as warning 8. The door is the door of an unmonitored journey through 12 different rooms. Tradition 9. The Norse tradition. The Eddic literature and later Icelandic sagas describe a particular hour of the night, sometimes called Utchearu in Old English, the pre-dawn sorrow, when the dead were said to walk closest to the houses of the living and attempt to enter through unguarded doors. The texts are practical, not metaphorical. The protective practices are detailed. Iron at the threshold, salt at the door. The hearth fire kept burning through the night, even when nobody was awake to tend it. The greeting spoken aloud to whoever might pass, even when no one was visibly there. The checkpoint will tell you what the Norse were describing. They had observed that the deepest hour of the night is when the unfinished business of every previous loss in the sleeper's life, every grief, every regret, every unsent letter, every dead relationship is most likely to walk back through the unguarded door of the conscious self. The cargo, every previous funeral, every previous departure, every previously buried decision, returning at 3 a.m. to ask whether it was correctly buried. The Norse remedy was specific. Never sleep with the hearth cold. Never enter the night without acknowledgement of what was lost. Never let the unguarded hour find you with the door unnamed. The checkpoint counts this as warning 9. The door is the door through which the unfinished dead return. 9 traditions. The checkpoint could continue. The Taoist Neijing Tu warned about the unguarded Shen at the night gate. Indigenous shamanic traditions across continents warned about the lower world door entered without a drum. The medieval Christian compliant tradition built an entire liturgy around the closing of the day. Every wisdom tradition the checkpoint has read has the same warning. Here is the real issue. Every tradition was warning about the same single door. The checkpoint will name it directly. The door is the threshold the human mind crosses. Every night, when the daytime defenses go off duty and the unprocessed contents of the unconscious begin to arrive at the conscious self with no doorman, every tradition called it something different. The Christians called it the cell after dark. The Sufis called it the silence after the Isha prayer. The Hebrews called it the threshold Lilith approaches. The Hindus called it the asuric hour. The Zen masters called it the cushion in the unsupervised dark. The Tibetans called it the bardo gate of sleep. The Greeks called it the indistinguishable gates of horn and ivory. The Egyptians called it the 12 gates of the Duat. The Norse called it the unguarded door at Ucharu. They were all describing the same threshold. And every single tradition issued the same instruction. Do not enter alone. Bring a structure. Bring a sentence. Bring a name. Bring a rite. Bring something the unguarded mind can hold on to when the contents start arriving. Now, the checkpoint turns the inspection on the modern viewer. The modern world has built a door more dangerous than any threshold the traditions ever described, and almost every adult walks through it alone every single night. The checkpoint will name it carefully. The door is the screen at 11:47 p.m. It is the moment after the day has run out of fuel, when the body is too tired for daytime defenses, but not yet asleep, and the hand reaches for the phone in the half dark. The screen does what no previous tradition's door has ever done. It does not allow the unguarded mind to surface its own contents. It actively delivers into the unguarded mind the unprocessed contents of thousands of other people in rapid succession, with no doorman, no closing rite, no companion, no structure. The checkpoint will say what the traditions would have said if they had seen it. The screen at midnight is the door of every tradition's warning combined into one architecture. It is the noonday demon's verdict delivered in text. It is the qarin's whisper delivered in pixels. It is Lilith at the threshold, dressed as a notification. It is the asuric hour, monetized. It is makyo dressed as content. It is the bardo gate, opened by a thumb. It is the gate of ivory, disguised as the gate of horn. It is the 12 gates of the Duat, crossed in 8 minutes, with no amulet. It is the door at Acharu, opened by a glowing rectangle the size of a hand. The checkpoint will say it directly. There is no protective practice in any tradition the checkpoint has read that anticipated this door, because no tradition could have imagined a door that delivers into the unguarded night mind the curated contents of an entire planet's unfinished business, and that does so every night without resistance, without a closing rite, with no companion in the room. That is the door every religion warned you not to open alone at night. And almost every adult walking the earth in 2026 opens it alone every single evening past 11. The checkpoint has watched what this nightly opening does to the body. The mind that goes through the door at 11:47 p.m. wakes at 3 a.m. with a verdict it cannot trace. The verdict was not written by you. The verdict was assembled in the unguarded night mind from 1,000 small inputs the door delivered after the daytime defenses went off duty. Most of what gets called insomnia in 2026 is not insomnia. It is the body's reasonable response to having been asked the night before to host the unprocessed contents of a planet, alone, in the dark, with no closing rite. Most of what gets called anxiety in 2026 is not anxiety. It is the residue of last night's door, still reverberating in the body 12 hours later. Most of what gets called depression in 2026, at least the variant that arrives quietly around 11 a.m. for no nameable reason, is the acedia of the desert fathers, fed every night by a door they could not have anticipated. The checkpoint is not blaming the device. The checkpoint is naming the architecture. The architecture is a door without a doorman, opened nightly, alone, in the exact hour every tradition spent 2,000 years warning against. I opened the door alone at midnight for years and called it winding down. It was not winding down. It was the slow disassembly of the closing rite the body needs to enter sleep with the inner court adjourned. The morning verdicts that arrived for years afterward were assembled in those unguarded sessions by an architecture I had never been taught to recognize. The first night I closed the door deliberately, phone in another room, one sentence spoken aloud, hearth not cold, was the first night in years the body slept without negotiating with material it had no way to process. That was the night the checkpoint started keeping a watch. 9 traditions, 1 door. The checkpoint will compress what every tradition was actually prescribing into a single sentence. The unguarded mind, alone at night, will be occupied. The only question is by what? The Christians said, occupy it with the hours. The Sufis said, occupy it with the breath of the name. The Hebrews said, occupy it with the Shema and the verse at the door. The Hindus said, occupy it with mantra and sandhya. The Buddhists said, occupy it with a teacher, or do not sit alone after dark. The Tibetans said, occupy the falling asleep moment with a chosen image. The Greeks said, occupy the day's end with the philosophical examination. The Egyptians said, occupy the 12 gates with the amulets prepared in advance. The Norse said, occupy the threshold with iron, salt, and the hearth still warm. Every tradition, the same architecture. The mind will be occupied. Choose the occupant. Here is the practice. Every tradition gave a version of it. The checkpoint will give you the simplest one. Once a night, at the exact moment the day finishes, and before the door at 11 would normally open, perform a 4-part closing rite. Part 1. Place the phone in another room. The screen does not enter the bedroom. This is the Hebrew amulet at the door, the Norse iron at the threshold. The door is not closed by intention. The door is closed by architecture. Part 2. Speak one sentence aloud or in your head. The court is adjourned for the night. Anything that needs to be decided will be decided in the morning. This is the Greek philosophical examination, compressed. This is the Sufi dhikr, modernized. This is the Christian compline, in 3 lines. Part 3. Place one chosen thought at the threshold of sleep. Not a problem. Not a worry. A single chosen image, sentence, or memory. This is the Tibetan sleep yoga, the Hindu mantra japa before sleep. The substrate of tomorrow is being built right here. Choose the occupant. Part 4. If a verdict arrives at 3 a.m., and it sometimes will, even with the rite performed, name it. This is the night court. The night court does not have jurisdiction. The morning will hear the case. Then return to the chosen thought. The checkpoint has watched what happens to people who do this rite for 30 consecutive nights. The morning verdicts, almost universally, get smaller. The 3 a.m. wake up when it happens becomes survivable. The architecture of the day quietly improves because the door is no longer being opened alone. This is not a fix for sleep. This is the closing rite every wisdom tradition prescribed under a different name. Compline, Aisha, Mariv, Sandhya, sleep yoga, the Pythagorean examination, different rite, same architecture. Close the door on purpose every night before the unguarded hour arrives. That is the practice. The checkpoint has noticed that the closing rite is almost impossible to perform inside a phone whose other inputs are designed by software to keep the door open until the body collapses. Drift inward is the small private room, the checkpoint built for exactly this kind of inspection, a place to write the closing sentence, place the chosen thought, and adjourn the night court before the unguarded hour arrives. It is not a fix. It is a single quiet doorman on a device whose other doors are designed to stay open through the night. The ruling, the door every religion warned you about, is the screen at 11:47 p.m. The unguarded mind, alone at night, will be occupied by something. The only question is by what? Choose the occupant. Place the phone in another room. Speak the closing sentence. Adjourn the night court. The morning will hear the case. Tonight, the door is closed.